this morning to make the most of it. Over to you, Matt.
Yes, thank you there, Janet. So everyone, I would just like to run through the itinerary for the webinar today. So we'll start with some introductions and some housekeeping, which we've just done there. Just before I move on to the housekeeping, the next item on the agenda will be an explanation as to how EPAs work, their purpose, and the different methods that are typically used for EPAs. After we've moved through that point, we'll then move on to our first structured topic for this webinar, which will be candidate presentation. So how they present themselves and certain methods that they can use to present themselves in the best light. After that, we'll move on to a question and answer session where we'll be happy to answer all your questions. If there's anything where we would like to double check or confirm on that, we'll let you know, and then obviously we can get in touch at a later date to confirm those questions there. Then finally, we'll move on to the closing statements as well as some information on the next upcoming webinars. Okay, so in terms of the housekeeping for this webinar, should anyone get disconnected, just try to reconnect via the link and then join back on. Hopefully we won't have any connection issues over the country. But the other thing I'd like to mention is if we could hold questions until the question and answer session so that Janet and I can get through as much of the information as possible and keep on time there. All right, is everyone ready to start there?
Yep.
Fantastic. Okay, so just to start off with, I'd just like to explain the main purpose of an EPA as well as the way that it works and the methods that are typically used. So the main idea behind endpoint assessment so that we are trying to confirm the way that learners have dealt with their qualification and whether or not they're competent and confident in the way that they do their jobs or in their particular roles. So across the vast list of qualifications, as you can imagine, this can vary, but the main point is that we're not comparing one learner to another. Each and every case is specific to the learner in terms of how they apply their knowledge, their work, and so on against the set list of criteria that we have to work off of. Now, obviously, with EPAs, there has been a lot of disillusion around whether or not these things are there to catch them out, to trick the learners, or that they're sort of hard and fast tests for the learners. Admittedly, some qualifications do require them to go through a knowledge test, which, yes, that is a test, but it's not the be-all and end-all, because there's usually other parts of the qualification where if they're not good in a test environment, it does allow them to still then showcase their competencies in other areas. And then that brings us on to some of the methods that we then use for endpoint assessment. So as I said, there's stereotypical tests where these would be knowledge tests and so on. There's assessment of portfolios of work. There's professional discussions, as well as structured interviews and in some cases observations as well. Janet, would you like to add anything to that there?
Yeah, what I think people understand is in the past, qualifications such as an apprenticeship, the old apprenticeships didn't have a test at the end. So people come away with qualifications but weren't judged independently as into meeting the criteria. And one of the original things that came up from setting these standards, they were written by employers. They weren't written by Ofqual or written by the government. They were written by people within industry. And these are the behaviours, skills and knowledge that we require these people to have. And it was a way we felt, I was part of a trailblazer group that actually set up some of the standards, was to say, well, okay, this person has gone through this training. How are we going to check that they've retained the knowledge, have the skills, and have the behaviours that we expect within this industry? And independently assessed. So now it's like a person works through their qualification with a training provider, but at the end, it's not the training provider that actually tests them and sees them and meet them. It's an independent body, and that's what an EPA, End Point Assessment Organisation is. It's an independent body that will say, okay, you've done this training, what are the skills, what are the knowledge, what are the behaviours you've got. And it's a way of allowing the person to showcase themselves and also to divulge the knowledge, skills and behaviours that they've attained during this qualification. So it's not a catch out, it's a way of an independent body saying, okay, you've done this training, show me what you have learned. Because in the past, so many people have got qualifications and within 12 months you ask them and they don't know anything, which is unfortunate. And it's a way of looking at not just can they retain the knowledge, i.e. laws and legislation, etc., but have that skill set. And part of the qualification is having that skill set. So how do you assess skills? It's talking about it. And that's one of the easiest things to talk about is, you know, what do you do? How do you do it? And like we said, it's not a test, it's not a catch out, it's a set of standards we assess them against that are written alongside the standard. And it's a way of saying, okay, you say you do this, how do you do it? So it's not a, like you say, it's a catch out. We don't have, you know, each person comes from a different background, a different industry, but the qualification is still the same. So it's not, it's tailored towards their it's their industry and their qualification. You could be somebody working in the motor industry, and you could be somebody working in the catering industry. If they're doing qualification, the standard is the same, but the emphasis may be on different slightly things. So they've given the, if they were doing a portfolio of evidence or a professional discussion, the professional discussion would be around what they have learned within their industry. So it's not like a set thing where it's everybody has to talk about the same thing, because it could be talking about slightly different things, but the emphasis on those knowledge, skills and behaviours. And I think when people go to endpoint assessment, it's to understand what those knowledge and skills and behaviours they have been working towards in the past 12, 18 months, 2 years. What are they being judged against? And that is the standard itself. Are they meeting the competencies of the standard? And I think, and it's in a way, it's much better than the old apprenticeships where this person is independently judged. Do they meet the standard? And they're also graded, which is something slightly different. In the past, vocational qualifications have never been graded. You've either got it or you haven't. Whereas here, the learner has a chance to get themselves either a pass or a distinction. Some have merits as well. And they're constantly, you know, what the learner is trying to do is get the best, and we're trying to get the best out of them during that endpoint assessment to meet that distinction grade. At the moment, it's still new to employers. Very still new to employers. And how do you differentiate between somebody who's got a pass and a distinction? Well, as an employer myself, that used to be, if somebody said I've done an apprenticeship and got a distinction, I know who I would employ when somebody's got a pass or no qualification at all, that they've not actually got sat a test to prove their knowledge, skills and behaviour. So in a way, it's a way of showcasing the learner's knowledge and skills and behaviours at the end, what they've learned over the past 18 months, 12 months, 2 years, of learning. And in a way it is, I would say, it consolidates everything into the endpoint assessment. So the learner has to be ready for that. And I think that's later on we're going to go on to how we ensure the learner is ready for that, and how the behaviours and what we expect that learner to do. And of course we will go through coaching before that. So it's understanding what's involved in it. The learner isn't suddenly put in front of a knowledge test or put in front of a professional discussion for the first time. Hopefully they would have had coaching and training around that, about what to expect. But we come in as an endpoint assessment, as an independent organisation that assesses against the standards, not our standards, but the standards that are put down, and we mark each person on the standards that have been written more than our own standards. So that is like really, it is, and each independent assessment organisation will use that standard. So it is a way of standardising the qualification nationally. So anybody that's done it from Carlisle to Camden Town in London has the same qualification and met the same standard. Okay, back to you, Matt.
Yes, thank you there, Janet. So just to expand on some of that there, as Janet was saying, all of these qualifications are assessed against the standard. It's never comparisons between people themselves. So for instance, if there were two people within the same organization undertaking the same apprenticeship, but in different sites or even the same site, they wouldn't be at all compared against each other. They would be compared against the standards and how well they perform in their own job roles. Now, even two people within the same organization with the same role in the same site could have very different expectations of themselves. So this is why it's very important for us to be able to get the most from the learners in terms of what they are doing for themselves in their own specific job roles, in order to be able to assess them and assess their competence in their own roles. So another thing I would like to touch on is, as Janet was saying earlier there, is with these different assessment methods, there is obviously quite a few different methods that are available there, and they're set ones that are used for different qualifications. Now, as the organization that we are, we do provide toolkits that not only you as training providers, but organizations as well have access to, which showcases and gives guidance towards how best to prepare the learners for these endpoint assessments. Again, I just want to sort of drive home the point that none of these assessments are ever to catch a learner out. The main purpose of them is to try get the best and the most from the learners to find out how competent they are and how well they perform within their job, not in relation to anyone else, but in terms of what is required of them from the standards.
I think the other point is the employer involvement in this. In the past, a lot of training providers have trained the staff with little or no employer involvement. The employer has very little contact that they understand. The emphasis now on these is the employer involvement. The employer has very much, you know, they want to coach their staff, they want to retain their staff, and it's coaching the learner to the skills and knowledge that they want from that learner in their company. And it's the employer also has to be involved in this, and it is from day one. The employer is involved through the training provider and, more especially, the endpoint assessment, because before a person is brought to endpoint assessment, the employer, that person's employer, has to then state that person is ready for endpoint assessment. So really, the emphasis is now saying to the employer, well, you've got to know when they are ready. What are you looking for when they are ready? So it's very important, that, and I think it's extremely important, as myself as I was an employer, that I have to understand what they're ready for, and how am I going to manage to that learner to undertake that assessment in the best way they can and to obtain the best results they can. And it's that support mechanism. So it's like a triage thing. It's got your employer, your endpoint assessment, and your training provider all together, making sure that that learner goes to endpoint assessment and completes their endpoint assessment to the best of their ability. So the emphasis has changed slightly, and I think for the good as well, because employers know what they want from apprentices. They know what they need in their skill set. and it's getting them what they want from that person, and having an independent person to say yes, they have met that, I think is a bonus for the company themselves, to say they have passed their endpoint assessment and they've got a pass or a distinction, and it's jointly owned by everybody apart from the apprentices, but it's also the employer as well. And I think that's the most important message, that it is employer owned, and apprentices owned as well. It's not, you know, we're there to facilitate, not to, like you say, to catch them out. We're there to facilitate that person's consolidation of learning by the methods that the plan says we have to assess them by. We don't say, well, the best method of getting, you know, understanding this learner is do a professional discussion. In the standards themselves and the apprenticeship standards, it will stipulate the types of methods we have to use in order to assess that person. And sometimes it may be, like Matt said, it might be an interview, it might be a portfolio interview, it might be a professional discussion. We don't set those, that's already set. They said we have to assess them by this method. So we're not trying to catch them out. That is what they feel when these standards were wrote, the best method of showcasing that learner. Okay, back to you, Matt.
Thank you there, Janet.
Yeah.
Yes, so, you know, as Janet said there, the emphasis has changed, whereas previously it would be near enough a tick box exercise during an apprenticeship where an assessor would go, yes, I've seen this, yes, I've seen this, yes, I've seen this, whereas now there is a set expectation that the learners are learning different skills and they're learning how to apply these skills, knowledge and theories, as well as actively promote behaviours that are part of their remit to fulfil the particular apprenticeship role or that particular role within their employer. And as Janet said, the employers will be involved with this right from the start, where they will give you know, job descriptions, they will detail or set out how that they want their staff to be trained within a particular qualification, and so on. So it's very, very important that we are looking at it from this new perspective, that it's not, yes, I've seen a learner do that once. It's, okay, we've taught the learner how to use these skills, we've taught the learner how to use all these different knowledge parts here, and then we move on to the endpoint assessment, where it is now a verification of, oh, okay, you know, how do you do this within your job? And they would showcase that, give us evidence that they are competent within these particular areas and that they do feel comfortable to do their job with confidence and being able to apply all these different things that they've learned throughout their apprenticeship, which I think will move us on to our first hot topic, as it were. And this comes down to candidate presentation. So as Janet said, part of some of the things that we try to make available for you is guidance from ourselves in terms of how best the learners can be prepared to present themselves, and not only to present themselves in their own best light, but to be prepared for what to expect from their own endpoint assessments. So for this particular hot topic, the main emphasis that we have here is on learners speaking in a general context. Now, whilst we can appreciate that, look, if learners are trying to talk about theories and particular methods of dealing with situations, it is very easy to slip into that general context. Oh, if this happens, a manager will use this method. But that's not what we're looking for, because that's nothing to do with the learners. Whilst we can appreciate that they might be referring to themselves, it's better that it's direct and it comes from them, so that there is that direct transfer of evidence to ourselves regarding how that learner has approached that particular situation. We always recommend that learners will use the STAR method. So that is, the situation, what is the situation, possibly giving us a brief background regarding that, the task that needed to be completed in order to meet or satisfy that particular situation, followed by, a detail or explanation or justification as to what actions they took during this particular task. What did they do? Why did they do it? If they didn't do it, what could possibly be the consequences? And then obviously the end result being, was it satisfactory? Did it satisfy that particular situation? And on top of that, what did they particularly learn from that? So on reflection, what did they learn from doing that particular task or dealing with that particular situation? So it could be very well that they've had a situation where someone trips and falls in work, for example. Admittedly, it's a slightly more simple example, but they would then go through, right, okay, I need to do a risk assessment based on what's happened here. I need to possibly complete any other forms or assessments that are part of the employer's list of set health and safety things. Once they've done all of this and they've justified why they took the particular actions that they have, when they then talk to us about this result, yes, was it rectified? If there was a trip hazard, was that then removed or mitigated in any way, shape or form? And moving forward, what have they learned from this? Oh, well, they've learned, okay, if it's a dark day, they need to turn the lights on so that any particular trip hazards that can't be mitigated are easily visible. Something along those lines. We're looking for learners to show ownership of these particular situations and being able to really take an active role in dealing with these situations as part of their job role.
One of the
Janet,
things,
would you like to...
yeah, one of the things is preparing a learner to do this, and it's having those situations that they can recall to hand during their endpoint assessment. So it's sometimes a learner is not aware that they've done these things during their qualifications, and it's what great way of coaching a learner before they come onto endpoint is to say, well, you did this, you did that, you did this, and get them to realise, oh yes, I did do that, oh yes, I can remember doing that. And having those like little nuggets of time when they have shown those skills to take with them to endpoint. Often learners will forget some of the great things they've done during their apprenticeship and some of the great skills they have shown during their apprenticeship. And it's getting them to remember, do you remember doing this? Do you remember doing that? Do you remember doing that? And so they go in with that knowledge still. Oh, yes, I can use them as examples of how I can showcase myself. So one of the endpoint assessors was, tell me a time when you come across a conflict and how you dealt with that. They've already got that little nugget that they remember from that and say, oh yes, I remember a time when, and then can give a good example in relation to that using that STAR method. So it's preparing that person with them little scenarios and nuggets that they've already got originally, and then they can use that. There was nothing worse than a learner when you're going through EPA and say, can you give me an example of when you have done? And they go, and they're having to recall 2 years, 18 months experience because it doesn't come to hand, and they're under stress and under pressure because of having this conversation. So it's preparing that learner with those little scenarios and nuggets of information of when they have done that, and making aware when they have done that before they go to endpoint, so they're already coached before they get there. And it's the situation where I always worry if a learner doesn't start with the word I during that conversation. I did this, I did that, I did this. When they refer to other people, which Matt was saying, it's me, myself and I, it's when they say the manager did that. No, I did this and I did that and I did this and I did that. That's what we want to hear, because they're showcasing themselves and not other people. So it's preparing that learner with them situations And in some of the endpoint assessments, they can refer to, you know, they can have their portfolio and small parts of their portfolio present. So they can refer to a little prompt sheet, you know, something that can prompt them to think, yes, I remember a situation where that happened. And that's very important that learner's coached in that way. So they're not sort of like sat for 5 minutes trying to think of a situation where they can showcase themselves. It's already there. Because a lot, like I said, a lot of learners don't realise the skills and knowledge and behaviours they have got and have learned, and it's hard to recall it. And therefore, it's getting them to recall it straight away during the endpoint assessment. So that's part of the coaching. Okay, back to you, Mike.
Thank you there, Janet. So another particular example of this, and this is a trend that I started to notice recently, in particular during professional discussions regarding CPDs. So one of the things that learners will, or at least I've noticed some learners have started to do, is they refer to particular activities that they've got on their CPD log that they're referring to the overall outcome or the benefits to the team rather than themselves. So just to bring it back again, the learners are now referring to these particular situations in a general context, in an overall outcome, rather than the specific task in which they had to do something. You know, the reason why this particular activity was chosen, what they specifically had to do themselves for this activity, and then obviously to showcase how in practice they would then pass this on to their team. That is excellent for them to showcase there. However, the main premise is that they can't jump from having the particular activity to what the team has learned. The main emphasis, as Janet and I are saying, is all about what the learner has done, what the learner has learned, and moving forward, how are they able to implement this? So what they are in turn doing is jumping forward to how they're implementing this because of how their team is benefiting from these things that they have learned from. This is obviously, you know, whilst it's a lot of information and it does, you know, come across very well, it does look good from, you know, sort of an outside perspective. But in terms of what we're trying to assess and the evidence that we're trying to gather, it's not telling us what they have learned and what they have specifically done for this particular activity. You know, they're able to showcase to us, okay, how are they now applying this knowledge or disseminating this knowledge to their team? And then obviously on reflection and so on, you know, it is always good practice for the learner to reflect. So, you know, I learned this about health and safety. Moving forward, I'm going to make sure that my team knows what to look for this. And I see sort of, you know, the trend that we need to go on refresher courses at least once a year so that we can keep on top of this so we don't have any problems like we had previously, or just to avoid any problems. So, you know, this boils down to, again, the learners need to take ownership of their apprenticeship. They need to realize that, look, whilst, you know, a training provider is coming to teach this, the organization itself, in some situations, is funding this apprenticeship. It is still the qualification of their own. So they need to be showcasing and speaking about themselves, what they have learned, what they have done with this information, with this knowledge, and what they would like to do with it moving forward. And I think this is where, as Janet was saying, having these sorts of situations in mind, or running through or coaching the learner in terms of, okay, look, do you remember this time when you did this, and you know, you had an event on, your team decided that they were going to do something that you didn't think was best practice, so you stepped in and you set everyone jobs, disseminated the jobs out, and allowed the event to now run smoothly. It's situations like this where most people in their jobs will automatically do something without thinking about what they're doing. They just do it because they know it is the right thing to do, and they know it's what they need to do. So from either an employer or a training provider, being able to coach a learner and give them that information and point out these different situations where they have applied certain skills, knowledge, and behaviors is really, really beneficial, because someone who might do something automatically may not realize that, hold on, this situation, I'm covering X, Y, and Z. And that, again, to have that as part of their notes for endpoint assessment when they come to it, so that, as Janet said, when we ask them, oh, you know, could you tell me about a situation where this has happened and how you dealt with that? They would then immediately be able to recall this particular situation and go, right, okay, so the team was about to do this. I had to step in and set everyone specific jobs so that it would run smoothly for the day. You know, and they would then be able to showcase in terms of the different aspects for that particular scenario, you know, how they were able to take leadership, how they were able to tailor their tasks that they were setting people to their strengths. They were able to give us examples of what would be the repercussions should they not have done it in this particular way. If there was another way, why that wasn't the best way to take. And
the other thing, Matt, is ensuring that when they are using these situations, they are looking at the standard that we're assessing them against. They can come out with some absolutely brilliant situations that they've maybe dealt with or managed, but it doesn't meet any of the standard. And it's important that the situations that they have relate to the standards that we're assessing them against. So it's that preparation of thinking, well, we can use this situation here. Does it meet any of the knowledge, skills and behaviours that we're looking for at endpoint assessment? Does it meet any of those? And what you're trying to do is pick a situation where it meets a lot of them, and where it doesn't have to be a big thing. It could be, like you say, a trip hazard that they dealt with at work. But what they have to do is amplify literally everything they do. Like you said, it becomes routine at work. They do it all the time. I didn't think I was doing anything different. Yes, you are, but you just didn't realise. And it's getting them to expand and extract the finest details of everything they've done. And I think when they're thinking about them situations to bring to endpoint is to refer, looking at the standard and going, that is what I'm being assessed against. Does these situations meet a lot of that? Because what we're trying to do as endpoint assessments is get them as much out of them as possible. We're not there to catch them out, as we keep saying. We're trying to extract as much as possible. So it's up to the learner then to give us as much information. And it might sound trivial to them. It might sound a bit, which they would already know that. That's what some of the learners said, well, it's obvious that, isn't it? No, you've got to tell us, and it might be obvious, but you've still got to tell us that obvious thing, because that's what we're looking for, that you understand who, what, why, where and how of what you're doing. And so a lot of the learners will say, well, it's normal that, but yet it is, but why is it normal? And it's getting them to think about the situation and literally expand everywhere and everything, and getting the learner to state the obvious to us, because we're not we're judging them against a set of standards. We're not judging them against their work role. We're judging them against the standards, and it's got to make sure that the situations they're going to describe to us meet all of those, and how they can then diverge during that conversation to other areas. So like I said, simple thing, a trip hazard, they can talk about health and safety, but then they can talk about communication, how they communicated that to the team, how they planned then to do more interventions later on, how they reviewed it. that type of thing. So it's not just the situation, it's the who, what, why, where and how, the precursor, what happened before, what happened during, what happened after. So it's literally, the learner has to literally tell us everything, even though it might sound obvious to us and to them. We cannot say that they understand if they don't state the obvious to us. And I think that sometimes has been some of the issues that I have, is that the learner assumes that because we know it, they know it, but we assume that they do know it, but we don't assume anything. They've literally got to tell us everything. Okay.
Yes, thank you there, Janet. So another particular example that I would like to give for this is a lot of the time in particularly the team leader apprenticeship, there is a section on project management. Now, in a lot of organizations, team leaders aren't necessarily in charge of any projects or anything that they would deem as a project. Now, it could be someone working in an office environment where for their particular area, in their particular section that they're in charge of, they're getting something like a new printer. You know, stereotypically, you would ask someone, oh, no, what happened there? Oh, no, we got a new printer because the old one didn't print fast enough. Now, what they're not telling us is, hold on, they had a problem where the old equipment was inferior for their needs. They then looked at all the different options in terms of what was a viable improvement. They then planned out how this is going to happen. So was it going to happen on a Friday? Were they going to get people to come in at a particular time when workflow was not as high? All the other departments that they may possibly need to work with, external providers coming in, you know, e.g. installers or fitters, you know, how have they managed this? Was there a budget for it? How did the budget work in terms of, was it a budget in terms of staffing hours? Was it a budget in terms of equipment cost? All of these sorts of things, moving forward to how did it go? If there were any problems, how did they mitigate those? Did they have any contingency plans should something go wrong? And then on reflection, how did that project essentially wrap up? Was it a success? Is the new printer now better? Is there anything that they learned from that experience that they could use next time or for anything similar? And that in itself will showcase how that learner has dealt with something that they had to project manage or can be deemed as a project. Janet, if you would like to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think the word project sometimes, like you say, flummox people. It doesn't have to be something big. It's something that they took ownership of or implemented, and it's showcasing their management, their skills in relation to the knowledge they've learned about how to manage a project, but also the behaviours that they showed as well. And so, you know, to actually showcase your behaviours, it's explaining what you did and why you did it and how you did it. And a project can be as simple as implementing, like say, and getting a new printer. And it's, I think, like you say, people think a project is something that's, you know, going to cost thousands of pounds. It could be something very, very little that they have been involved in. And like I said before, it's coaching the learner to understand, and also employers to understand that, you know, what we're looking for is situations where that learner shines during that hour session, how they shine and how they can then demonstrate that they have these skills. And it's picking situations that they do have shown these skills within the workplace, and it's easy for them. The other thing I found with endpoint assessments is a lot of learners would use hypotheticals and they wouldn't use their actual situations. If that did happen, there's nothing wrong with hypotheticals, but we don't want the whole showcase of this hypothetical thing that, you know, if this happened, I would do this, if this happened, I would do that. Because occasionally they're not going to meet all the criteria during that professional discussion with the situations that they come in, but they can use hypotheticals within that to expand on their answers. Often what we try and do in a professional discussion is try and draw out as much as we can from that learner without literally saying, and did you do, and what did you do next, and what did you do next? You know, what we're trying to do is get the learner to tell us what the actual project was, how they managed it, what they did, what happened afterwards, and then sort of expand on that. Go, well, if it didn't happen this way, I would have done this. Because then they're showcasing the knowledge and skills and behaviours that they have learned during their apprenticeship, but don't have a situation where they can showcase that. So it's important that the learner has this nugget of situation, but then also is coached into saying, well, if that didn't happen, I would have done this, but it did happen, so I didn't have to do that. But I would have done this better this way and this way. And it's showing that the learner has understood, they can showcase what they have done, but also bring the hypotheticals in as well about, and so they're thinking about it in a retrospective way, looking at the situation and saying, well, if I did it this way, I do that way. And that's where the CPD log comes in as well, that they can bring in. So often learners will think, well, we're talking about my portfolio here, or we're talking about my CPD log here. There's nothing wrong with intermatching these, because what we're trying to do, you know, your CPD log will also reflect around your project. And so therefore there's nothing wrong in bringing other bits in that you will be assessed against, because as an endpoint assessor, you're trying to holistically, I think that's the word we look for, holistically assess. We're looking at as much evidence as we can gain from that situation. Because if you don't mention it there, we're going to have to mention it somewhere else. So it's trying to look at all the standard and go, how am I going to show all this knowledge, all these skills, all these behaviours in these situations by sticking to one area only? You can't just stick to your portfolio, you can't just stick to a project. You will bring in everything, and that's the most important thing. And I think in the past I've seen learners, they'll keep the script that they've remembered but not bring in hypotheticals. If this happened, I would have done this and I would have done that, because it's showcasing the skills, knowledge and behaviours that they have learned but didn't apply in that area. And I think that's so important, to get that distinction grade. A pass would mean that the situation they're in, to get a distinction, it's expanding on it. And that's where we want learners to really go for it and really expand on, I would have done this, I would have done that, and that didn't happen, but I could have done this. And it's reflecting sometimes and go, well, I should have done this, and I really realise now that I would have done this and would have done that. Just because the situation didn't go well doesn't mean to say it wasn't wrong. And that's important, because what you're trying to find out from that learner, extract from that learner, is they realise it was wrong. What would they have done now as a result of their learning in their apprenticeship? I think that's important as well, because often learners don't bring up the negative aspects of their training or the negative aspects of what they've learned in the workplace and how it went wrong. And that's important, that you can get a lot out of evidence of where it went wrong sometimes. And you can reflect on that and say, well, I would have done this now, I would have done this, and I can do this now, I can do that now. And it's showcasing that the learner has learned from that, and especially from his CPD log as well. So you can see where everything comes in to it, and it's getting that learner to literally go, this is the situation, and they go off. And I used to get coach learners before EPA doing spider grams, which is the situation in the middle and all the other parts of it off there that they could have to mention, and that would make that would need that would need that. And it's important that that learner then goes in remembering all those things that they did and things that he didn't do, and reflected back on and go, well, if I didn't, I should have done it this way. And I think that's important as well. So it's the negative parts as well as the positive parts of their training. Okay, back to you, Matt.
Thank you very much for that, Janet. So everyone, this moves us on to our next section, where I would like to open it up for question and answers. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to fire away.
No. Well, I'll ask
if anyone's looking for the mute button, that'll be at the bottom of your GoToMeeting window, where the microphone icon will be red. So if you bring that up, you'll be able to unmute your microphone. Anyone there who would like to ask a question.
I'd like to ask you a question, Matt, as an endpoint assessor.
Yes.
A situation where a learner has shined, literally, what do you think made them get that distinction more than a pass? What was the turning point, if you could sum it up, that you say, yes, apart from meeting the criteria, what did they do differently than the person that got a pass?
So a lot of the time with learners who will excel or get that exceptional answer will be where they've not only met the criteria, but they've turned around and they've given me a lot of extra information. So something that we said previously as well, a learner will not only say, okay, I had this situation, I dealt with it in this way. They'll go, I had this situation and I decided to deal with it in this way, because if I didn't do it in this particular way and I did it in another way, I would possibly not have reached everyone that I was trying to communicate with. And if I didn't reach everyone that I was trying to communicate with, then my whole team wouldn't work fluidly. They would, they in turn would give me all this extra information about basically justifying why they did the actions that they took, any other actions that they could have took. And in turn, they'll also reflect on that particular situation, where they'll turn around and they'll go, what I really learned from this is that, I can't teach everyone the same as I like to be taught. I need to make sure that when I'm communicating with everyone, I need to communicate to the audience's needs and not just my own. Really giving that extra forethought into these particular situations and why they did these things that they did and how it's benefited not only them, but either their organization, their team, their job role, any of these sorts of things, where they've really taken the package as a whole, not only just gone, I saw a problem, I fixed it, everyone's happy now. They've gone, there was this problem, I understand why it happened, I had several different options that I could take, I chose this option and it was the best option because, and giving other examples of why they didn't pick the other options. So it's really that holistic overall perspective that they look at. So they take me right from start to finish, every part of that particular situation, every other particular option that could be available to them, and then why they did those particular actions.
And to sort of add to that, do you think they had run through that before, that situation, as a practice? Did it feel as though they have been coached before that?
Yes, certainly. I think.
Yeah.
Yes, I think I can immediately tell when dealing with learners, whether it's someone who's just good at their job or whether it's someone who's been actually coached to showcase their abilities properly. So someone who might be good at their job will explain, in detail particular situations, but they won't necessarily showcase the reasons why they did these particular actions. And that's where you can really tell who has been coached to showcase themselves in the best light. So, for instance, I've had quite a lot of learners from the same organizations doing the same apprenticeship. And it's in these particular situations where I can really tell which learners have been coached and which learners haven't been coached. Or not to say that they haven't been coached, but have not taken the coaching on board. And that will really come across very evidently when you're assessing these learners and the way that they're answering and the way that they structure their answers as well.
Thank you.
Leah, Rachel, I don't know if you can hear us there.
Hi, Matt.
Leah,
Yeah.
did you have a question?
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you. I think for me, I think this seminar would have been brilliant at the beginning when we started delivering apprenticeships. And certainly there are a couple of points that I've taken from it. But I think what I'm looking for is some really sort of solid guidance on the new assessment plan. And the sort of the breakup of it rather than the how to answer the questions. We get great feedback from you guys for our apprenticeships, and we always take that on board. But sort of coaching them and using the STAR model and all that sort of thing is something that we already do, which is why our learners get some great results. So I think for me, it's it's a breakdown of the new assessment plan that I'm looking for, really. Although there has been a couple of helpful things that I will take from this, but this is why I don't really have any specific questions on this one. Thanks, Matt.
No, certainly. Thank you for that, Leah. Obviously, with this being the first webinar, we decided to take the topics right from the beginning. I'm glad that you were able to take away some really good positives and some tips from that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know that a lot of your learners are prepared very well, so I'd just like to thank you for taking on board our feedback with regards to that. Moving forward, we are going to have, obviously we had the hot topic for today being the candidate presentation. Moving forward, we will have other topics that may specifically relate to particular qualifications, as well as things that we are noticing that would be extremely beneficial towards learners and their particular qualifications.
Leah, can you just ask which assessment plan are you talking about?
I'm the team leader supervisor for leadership and management level 3.
Right, okay. So that's maybe something we can look at into more detail.
Yeah, I think, to be fair, which is my misunderstanding of what this was today. So yeah, it's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Okay, well that's something we can look at. And one of the hot topics, I think, is starting at the beginning, really, and looking at the assessment plan, which I think we want, and say, this is what it says, and this is how we do it. Yes, I think that would help. And I think it would be great if you could come up, you can either email myself or Matt with some of the sort of questions that you'd like to ask, once you've sat back and think about what parts of the assessment plan that you struggle with or what you don't understand, and maybe that's some basis we can use for our next webinar.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We've had ILM have done their presentation on how they're going to deliver. So obviously we've got ILM's version of how they're doing it and what they're going to expect, and obviously any documents that they're issuing. So for example, they're issuing a matrix, and they want people to work to their matrix rather than a trainer provider matrix.
Yes.
Yes. And so for us, really, it's what documents are you issuing, and how are BIOR doing it, and basically just to make sure that we're doing it exactly like we're supposed to be doing it.
Yeah.
I won't go into it too much because it's sort of beyond what today was about, I think. So yeah, I think it's just understanding what bits are fitting in where and what's expected, so that we don't fall foul of any, or you should have done that bit in there as well.
No problem. Yeah, no problem. But if you'd like to either email myself or Matt with some specific areas, and then we can look at that for the next time. Yeah. Yeah,
that'd be great. Thank you. That'd
be brilliant. Okay.
Good.
Thanks, Leah.
Thank you. Rachel, I can see that your microphone's on there. Did you have any questions for us there, or anything that you would like to add?
No, nothing really. I mean, firstly, hello, and sorry for joining late. Teams meetings, as I'm sure you can appreciate, run over a lot. But this is really our first sort of foray into standards. So first of all, it's nice to see that End Point Assessors look human and are approachable. Yeah, we're about 3-4 months into our journey now, so really just trying to take in as much as you can, and really excited to attend the upcoming webinars as well.
Excellent.
No, thank you there, Rachel. I'd just like to make everyone aware that the next webinar is on Tuesday, the 6th of October. So I don't know if you want to pencil that in on your diaries. As Zach might want to add now, communication regarding these webinars will be going out shortly. So Zach, if you'd like to add anything there?
Not particularly. I think for an introductory webinar, I think everything was covered. I think we need to pay emphasis on what Leah has sort of given us in terms of feedback for some of the topics that we need to sort of do in the future. So certainly one we need to do is on the team leader level 3 assessment plan. Also, I've got a couple of clients asking what a good portfolio would look like now that it's been reintroduced in the team leader assessment plan. Again, not to be marked, but to be looked over by the endpoint assessors. So you guys have still got you guys have still got a job on your hands now. Again, looking through that portfolio.
Yeah, that is one of my that's one of sort of my questions as well. Is what does this portfolio look like, and how does first of all, what we think it covers. Is that what it actually covers in terms of, you know, going to the assessor? So yes, that's I think that's a biggie. It's the pulling back the portfolio.
I think it's a case of what are we looking for within that portfolio, and how you present that information so it's easy for us to locate. I think that's the most important, is understanding what goes in there, and I think that'd be a really good topic to talk about. Really, is some of the things that we would expect to see in there. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I think on the junior content producer side, I think it's now learning more about and explaining more about how the assessment is going to be carried out remotely, what conditions are in place to be able to carry the assessment out remotely. So that is again I'd like to do another one on that one for Rachel, and then with regards to HR, human resources, there's loads of questions that I've got a list of with regards to the work-based, with regards to the consultative project as well, both on the level 3 and the level 5. So there's a few bits and bobs to cover, but I think certainly the team leader one, the new assessment plan for the team leader one, and the junior content producer one, I think those are the sort of upcoming ones that I would say that we'll probably do next October and November. Yeah,
I agree. I think it's great to read an assessment plan, but sometimes it just needs a little bit more amplification about what specifically is required in that, and I think that's something I think it'd be useful for all, actually. Definitely.
Yeah, certainly. Okay. Well, I think we can wrap up things there then. Well, thanks for everybody for joining. And as Matt mentioned, we'll be sending out the topics, the itinerary for the next webinar in October. So hopefully, look forward to talking to you then. Brilliant.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Zach, and thanks, Matt, and thank you everybody for joining. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thanks again,
Thank you.
Leah, and thanks again, Rachel.
Thank you. See you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.